You're getting to be pretty well known nowadays, I think, aren't you?
It seems that way. People are slowly taking note of what I'm saying. So, I mean, often it's a big surprise for me. Um, yeah, it's just all of this has been growing very slowly and steadily, and I like that fact that it's been a slow process. So, yeah, I mean, I look on the internet once in a while, and I'm surprised that my name comes up in certain areas. So, but I'm not online at home, so I just have about 10 or 15 minutes at work in the morning to get online and answer a couple of emails and the rest of it. So,
All right, let me get this straight. Daryl Bailey, currently a well-known teacher, non-duality teacher, and all those labels are attached to you, self-realized, and all those things. And you search for your name on Google.
no, no, no. It's
Okay, just want to get this clear, but no, you say you see your name coming up or whatever.
getting online and just kind of checking out stuff with Marcus, this friend of mine in England, and well, like one thing would be that the other day, Non-Duality Press released a DVD of me teaching in London from last year, and so Marcus sent through this little blurb from their newsletter, and they were saying some very nice things about what I was offering, and it seemed like they had kind of bumped my status in the non-duality circles a bit. So I found that a bit surprising. Yeah, so it's just stuff like that once in a while.
I haven't seen you interviewed. I know you have a book with Non-Duality Press, and I have a good impression of you just through what I've seen.
All right.
This series of interviews that I'm doing, I'm intentionally doing them kind of unprepared because I don't want to hit people with like in your book you said this, this, this. Could you elaborate on that?
Sure.
I don't know. I don't know how do you feel when that kind of stuff comes up?
It's fine. I mean, people sometimes want certain points clarified to some degree, but I find we end up. Well, I find often the interviews stay within a certain realm. The focus stays very much on thought, and there seems to be a lot of the times the questions are kind of seeking out whether I've arrived at some big goal. They might ask me if I'm happy,
Yeah.
and I don't find those things to be very pertinent to this whole situation. I mean, it's fine if somebody wants to clarify that kind of thing, but I mean, basically all I'm saying is that there's this big happening of this moment, and there's no way of saying anything about it, and it's moving in whatever way it'll move. So I'm really not concerned about any particular goal in this because I don't really know what life's presenting or going to present. So as I grow older, it just makes less and less sense to really expect anything at all, really.
I interviewed someone, and someone wasn't too happy that I didn't ask this person. I don't think I did. It was Anamika, a Dutch woman who lives in Auroville, India, and I never asked her about her enlightenment story.
Right.
And someone said, "Well, why didn't you ask that? That's what's really interesting." And it is interesting to hear that type of thing. But could an interview like this with you or someone like you or anyone be complete without that story? Do you have to have that story?
I don't think so. I don't feel so. It's because the so-called enlightenment is the realization that there isn't any story that actually tells you what's going on here. So the whole focus on this enlightened being per se is that's still very much part of the illusion. I mean, the realization is that there's just this happening, and there's no way of saying anything about it at all that would be true. We can have all kinds of storylines that seem to arise in this, but those storylines really aren't describing what's happening here. I mean, fundamentally, those storylines are based on pointing to forms that don't fundamentally exist, and then they're given labels that are just meaningless sounds. And it's quite fine on your day-to-day basis to, have those storylines come up, and they seem to be quite useful if you're thirsty and you want a glass of water or something like that. But if we're talking about reality and what's life all about, they really have no bearing on that whatsoever. So all of this focus to remain on stories of enlightenment, I find that kind of misses the point.
So what's the point? That's
Well, the point is that you can't really say what's going on here. And the point seems to be, in this apparent realization, seems to be just realizing that what we put our focus on in general just isn't the truth. So there's no way of saying, from my perspective, and I should preface this by saying that, I mean, this is just my perspective. I'm not asking anyone else to agree with this or look at life in this way, but from my perspective, there's no way of saying what any of this is in this moment. And I don't find that I'm causing any of it. It's just simply happening the way it's happening. So I don't really know what it is, and it's just happening the way it's happening. And within that there are what I guess I could call the usual storylines that people have, but the storylines themselves are a totally mysterious happening, just happening on their own. So it doesn't really. If somebody wants to have a big discussion about it, it ends about here.
Ends about here. Do you think that? I mean, like, do you think if some beings came from many light years away and visited us and saw us talking about this kind of stuff, what would it look like?
I have no idea. That's
depending on what their
perspective
would
be.
Yeah, let's say they were from a civilization, a million or a billion years beyond, so that this is all doesn't make sense even to consider it. But you know what I mean, from a different perspective, all this conversation about enlightenment and so on.
Irrelevant.
I mean, for irrelevant minute, for a minute or two, or for a second or two, it might look nutty,
Yeah, exactly, and it does look nutty to other apparent people here on Earth.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I mean, I still hear little stories, around the community here. People, some people who come to some of the gatherings that I have here will tell someone, maybe at a party, they start talking about coming to these gatherings, and somebody will say, "Oh, that's a nutcase that thinks everything's perfect." And
yeah.
And so it does seem nutty to a lot of people. And so I'm always emphasizing that this non-dual perspective is only important to those that are expressed with an interest in it. It has absolutely no bearing on anyone else. It's of no importance to anyone else, really. Either you relate to it or you don't relate to it. And if you relate to it, that's great. And if you don't relate to it, that's great. And it's very much like, it's just birds of a feather gathering together. So it's, sparrows don't hang out with robins, and robins don't hang out with sparrows. And they're both legitimate expressions of existence, but they don't necessarily have to hang out together and do the same things together. So... And I find it's the same thing with this apparent non-dual perspective, is that the only people who will relate to it are other people that nature is basically expressing in a similar fashion. So they're expressed in a way where they have an interest in this, and others don't.
It points to what's going on in the non-duality scene, because even within the scene, you've got sparrows and robins, and I don't know how much you notice that, or how much you feel you're part of the scene, or how many, do you hang out with a lot of people? You're kind of stuck there in Winnipeg, but I don't know.
I don't. I'm not generally connected to that larger, what people call the non-dual community in the world, but I did notice that early on, because I didn't have this non-dual term when I first started expressing this, and other people were saying, "Oh, well, that's a non-dual perspective," and so I kind of investigated this term and what it was meaning nowadays, and I thought, well, okay, I mean, for lack of any other term, that seems fine as a generic label for this. But I did notice that there were these different factions that were, some were saying, okay, this is, a true non-duality sensibility, a non-dual sensibility would be that people have to meditate and they have to do all of these spiritual practices. And then there's another group that says, well, no, a true non-dual sensibility would be that you don't do any practices at all. And there just seemed to be all these different factions that were existing. And I mean, my sense of it is just that the so-called enlightenment is a movement of nature itself, and sometimes it seems to occur with individuals that are living in a very formal, spiritual way, doing daily practices, and sometimes it occurs with people who are just walking down the street and something happens, or they go and they hear somebody else present this perspective, and they realize, wow, that makes more sense than any other perspective, and it's just immediately that's their perspective. So, and all of that is just the movement of whatever this is. So, but yes, it's interesting. It seems like there's sometimes an individual's expression gets confused with this larger sense of life being a totally mysterious event. And I mean, if I look at nature, I don't find any two things that are identical. I don't find any two identical snowflakes, or I don't find two identical human beings with the same breath rate or the same heartbeat or the same skin composition. So to think that people that generally have a non-dual sensibility, to think that they would all be expressed in the same way just doesn't really make any sense to me. What's your sense of it?
Oh, the so-called non-duality scene?
Well, you were saying that you were noticing that you had noticed that there were these different factions, and Robin's hanging out with Robins and Sparrow's hanging out with...
Yeah, no, to me, it's much more like, in high school, people, people who are sort of similar, who think similar values, similar, personalities and stuff tend to hang out. Because I go to the conferences, so I see groups of people hanging out and stuff. So, right. I mean, it's the scene, it's kind of like junior high, the whole thing. I've noticed that since the beginning. Since running like groups on Yahoo where people would tend to stick together and agree that they were enlightened, and people that didn't quite, that were different, weren't enlightened. And so there's I find that there's an I'm enlightened, you're not enlightened sense to the non-duality scene. And so if you really identify with the group maybe a little too much, then that group is the enlightened one and others aren't. And I definitely see that. So I don't know. What do you think of that perspective? I'm enlightened, you're not, and could that be useful sometimes in a dynamic between one person and another?
It wouldn't be my way of expressing it. I mean, really, all I feel I can offer is a certain consideration of life, a certain exploration of life, and ultimately it has nothing to do with whether somebody's enlightened or not enlightened. It's just whether or not somebody's willing to acknowledge that we don't have any tools for describing existence in any true fashion, and everyone's common experience, within everyone's common experience, there isn't anything to support the notion that we're causing our behavior or we're causing the apparent direction of our life. So it's just a consideration of the general assumptions that most of us seem to carry, and whether or not someone's interested in acknowledging that those assumptions don't actually fit what you might call our experience. They don't even fit. They don't fit anybody's experience. the assumption that we're in charge of our life, I mean, that really doesn't fit anybody's experience, because I've never met anybody who thinks that they've created their body or their brain. I've never met anybody who ever thought they created their basic needs or their interests or their concerns or their urges or their abilities or their lack of abilities. You know, those are the things that really give rise, you know, that's our basic being in a way, if we're looking at the world of stories and what we all experience in the world of stories. So I'm just pointing out that no one has any experience that supports the notion that we're creating ourselves or we're causing our direction in life, because all of that's provoked by our apparent needs and interests and concerns and the basic urges that arise, and then all of that functions apparently according to our bodies and our brains, and we're not creating those, and we don't create how they function. They just function in whatever way they function.
A person can hear that description as a dismissal of responsibility.
Except that I'm saying that you haven't created your urge to be responsible, and you haven't created your ability to love. And so when like often people will hear this and they'll think, God, if I believe that, I'd just sit around doing nothing all the time. And so it's a very simple thing to ask them to try to do that. Just sit around and do nothing all the time. Give up all the things that make sense to you. Give up all the things that you value. Give up your urge to love. Give up your urge to be responsible, and see what happens. And you'll discover that you can't, because you aren't in charge of that. You didn't create them in the first place. And if you have an urge to love, and you have that capacity, and you have an urge to be responsible in certain situations, and you have that capacity, you didn't create those urges or those capacities. That's, I mean, you could say it's a manifestation of nature, or whatever you want to call this greater unexplainable happening.
I have really good sense that you come from a very unfettered place. What's that all about?
I'm not quite clear what you're meaning by unfettered. Do you mean just not attached to any ideas, or?
Kind of unattached and not giving a person much traction with their stories or their ideas.
Oh, because essentially that's, well, again, from my perspective, this moment is a happening or a dynamic. I mean, words are so limited, but it has a liveliness to it. It's an event. And the thoughts are simply a portion of the event. The thoughts are coming and going on their own. So from my perspective, you know, the whole tradition of meditation is just simply the acknowledgement of the large event of the moment. And in the acknowledgement of this event, there has to be an acknowledgement that the thoughts come and go on their own. You know, these apparent words that are arising right now, I don't really know what that is. I mean, within my storyline, I was trained to call them words, but I have no idea what this is. It's just an event that happens the way it happens, and so for me, it's the curiosity is this event. You know, the essence of all of this is this event, this dancing dynamic, this happening, and all the apparent forms are just the automatic expression of this happening. And so thoughts are just some of the apparent forms, and you know, these apparent labels are part of the dance. They just come and go as they come and go. They arise, you know, in this apparent conversation. They come up the way they do. When this conversation ends, they won't come up the way they do now. The whole thing moves on to something else, and the focus will move on to something else. Although the focus is fundamentally really just the large event.
Sounds like. I mean, I read that you have meetings like once a week.
Once a month.
Once a month.
Yes.
And seems to me, just from the way you're talking, is they would often just kind of collapse into like a silence or something. Does that tend to happen?
Not completely to a silence, but there is, what happens in those gatherings is there's more of an acknowledgement of the event, and there's less focus on the world of thought. Thoughts still come and go, but the primary focus is not on those thoughts. Comments come and go, but the primary focus is not on those comments. It's basically acknowledging this larger event. And so usually within those gatherings, I find that everyone ends up being pretty relaxed. It's just, they have this sense of life just being this event, and it's playing out the way it's playing out.
Do you, when you have your meetings, do you just show up? Is there sometimes a topic, any kind of a seed to start the event?
No, generally I just show up and I'll ask if anybody has any pressing question, and if they have a question, then I'll just have a response that will come up in relation to that question, and if they don't have any pressing question, then I will kind of ramble on for maybe 40 minutes, and again, it's just a consideration of what we already know from our general experience. So it's a consideration of what our actual experience is, and then we take a break and then come back, and then it's just, the rest of it is just simply acknowledging the moment, the happening of the moment, without any focus on thought.
So tell me, if you will, about this calling or this event or this unfolding of your meeting with people.
Yeah, that all arose quite slowly. I had been a meditation monk for about 6 years in England, in a Theravada tradition, and I had had a strong urge to leave that once my full training had taken place. And I came back here to Manitoba. I'd been away for many, many years. I'd been living in other countries, and I wanted to be closer to my mother and father because they were getting older, and I wanted to be back here closer to them if they needed help. And so when I came back here, I wasn't really certain where anything was going, and within the next few years, this whole other sensibility arose, or you could say a more profound sense of something I had been interested in for a very long time arose. And then I wasn't sure what to do, because I at first I just didn't think anyone would have any interest in it whatsoever, but a friend of mine who runs a yoga center was kind of interested in some of the things that I was saying. Her name is Sandra Stewart, and so we would go for walks and have discussions about this perspective. And then one day the penny dropped for her, and she just all of a sudden realized that there had never been anything wrong with her, that everything that was occurring was the natural expression of this great mysterious dance of existence. And so then she asked me to start offering this perspective at her yoga center, and I told her that I wouldn't be teaching it specifically from a yoga context, and she said, no, that's fine, just teach whatever you want to teach. So I began expressing this, and personally I thought the whole thing would probably be over very quickly. I felt that there wouldn't be that many people who related to it, but the first gathering had about 24 people in it, and I was presenting it over 7 Sunday mornings, and about half of them really got it, and I know that a quarter of them, it's just gone deeper and deeper as time has gone by. So, and since then, it's just continued. I've had hundreds go through. I don't really want any particular group to form. I'm simply presenting this perspective, and if someone relates to it, that's fine, and if they don't, that's fine. And over the years, there have been a few people who return because they just kind of like getting together once a month with like-minded people, and you were saying that at the beginning of this. But it's just a gentle touching base. I find it interesting. If I go to someplace like California or England, it seems like the focus is really on the world of thought and the world of practice, and so I end up having to field a lot of questions around that. But here in Winnipeg, we just get together and just kind of hang out, and it's just a very quiet association, really.
Yeah, that's nice.
Mm-hmm. It is very nice. I feel very fortunate that the people who have come over the years. I mean, and it's very interesting because very few of them had any real interest in non-duality. They came mainly out of a curiosity. Some of them were Sandra's yoga students. And I don't really present this from any particular spiritual format. Again, it's just a consideration of what our actual experience of life is. So basically I start with the fact that almost everyone eventually walks around saying that everything is changing. And so I just ask people to consider, well, what does that mean? If you're walking around saying everything is changing, and I ask you, what's happening here, you give me a story about forms, but if you tell me everything's changing, the forms can't be the reality because all the forms are changing. So, what do you mean when you say everything is changing? Do you really mean that? And if you really mean that, what exactly is happening here then? It's got to be just an event that has no particular form to it. So we start out with something like that, and just move into some other areas, a consideration of thought and what it is we have with thought. Like these labels, a head full of labels. Where did those labels come from? Did you come out of the womb with those labels? And if you didn't come out of the womb with those labels, where did they come from? And as we look at that within our existing storylines, like this is just it's like a dream to waken dreamers. It's you go into the dream, you start examining the dream through the labels that the dream provides, and the dream itself says, well, I can't be the truth, because none of us has the sense that we arrived with a head full of labels. We have the feeling that we were taught these labels over time by other apparent people. And so essentially when whatever this is, first presented itself, we didn't have a label for it. And if we look at the labels that we got, if it was another country, we'd get a different set of labels. If we weren't speaking English, if we were speaking French or German or Russian or whatever, it would be an entirely different set of labels. And so the labels can be anything at all. It could be Blix, flute, and wassail. Instead of talking about consciousness and awareness and a body, let's change the name. Let's call it Blix, flute, and wassail. And the interesting thing is that if we sit around thinking about bodies and awareness and consciousness, it seems like we really understand something. But if we sit around thinking about Blix, flute, and wassail, it just sounds like gibberish. And I'm pointing out that words like body and consciousness and awareness, that's just gibberish too. So it's a simple consideration of just our general sense of existence and our storylines, and and then it moves into, we have the feeling that we cause the movement of our life, we direct our lives. But then again, if we consider what our actual experience is of our life, we don't have the impression that we created our body or our brain. We don't have the impression that we're making them function the way they function. Like the heart is just beating, the synaptic firings of the brain cells are just firing. We don't have the impression that we created our basic needs, the need to eat or the need to go to the toilet. We don't have the impression that we created our interests in life, whether we love science or art or family or business or technology. We don't have the feeling that we create our basic concerns in any particular moment. We don't create the urges that we have to move in a particular direction. And we haven't created our fundamental abilities or our fundamental lack of abilities. and yet somehow we have the feeling that we're directing our life when our whole apparent activity in existence is based on the body and brain, the basic needs, interests, concerns, urges, abilities, and lack of abilities that we haven't created. So it's just a simple consideration of the storyline we have in relation to the apparent experience that we have, and we discover that the storylines don't really make any sense.
You've sort of established that whatever it is you're doing can be done probably anywhere. If you're doing it, in Winnipeg. Not that Winnipeg, lacks anything, but it's more that it's more that it's not influenced by a spiritual culture like California is, or like you mentioned.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. And in fact, I get comments. People come, like last year when I went to England and I was invited to be interviewed by Renata McNay on Conscious TV. I mean, there were certain individuals here in Winnipeg that had a strong interest in non-duality, and it really floored them that I was living in Winnipeg. And as one of them said, like, why would you be living here? Like you would expect that or they would expect that I would be living in California or in some spiritual hotbed. But I'm not really a very spiritual person. If I had to describe my own sensibility, it would be somewhere, some cross between an artist and a scientist. I'm not specifically what you would call a very spiritual person. I just have this overwhelming interest in this examination of just the basic happening of the moment, and I have no idea what any of that actually is. It just happens the way it happens.
Seems like the last few years I've been hearing people, myself included, that any expression that falls under this umbrella of non-duality is basically art or even performance art.
Oh yes. Oh, interesting.
Do you get a sense of that? You alluded to that when you mentioned that you see yourself more as an artist or scientist.
Yeah, and I'm not aware of what others are presenting. I really stopped reading generally in these areas quite a few years ago. People tell me about certain other teachers, and I might look briefly on the internet again in the morning before I go to work or start the workday, I get just a very brief sense of what somebody's presenting, but even then I don't have a good sense of what all is being presented out there. I hear certain names mentioned quite often, but I know there's a huge range of presentations out there.
Yeah. So in your work, do you see it as art, as science, or more as art, more as science, or some kind of combination?
I feel that all of this is arising as some kind of artistic expression in me. When there was this compulsion to write these books, there was automatically involved with that a consideration of the rhythm of the phrasing, the visual of the book itself and the text, how it was laid out. There was a consideration of the texture of the words, like I would read the phrases out loud, and there would be a feeling for the texture of those words and the rhythms of those words. So all of that has a certain artistic performance quality to it. Whether even here, I mean, now it's kind of second nature. In the writing of those books, it just seemed like there was this very slow process. The whole process was trying to kind of find a comfortable way of expressing all of this. And then as far as the science aspect, I remember Jiddu Krishnamurti once said that the truly religious mind is the scientific mind, and what I got from that was just basic observation and making note of what's being observed, what's just an acknowledgement of what's happening in the moment, very direct and very clear acknowledgement.
Mm.
So, and all of that, again, I mean, it's not like what I'm saying, it comes from a clearer place. Even that attitude of direct observation or just a clear acknowledgement of what's happening in the moment, I don't really know what that is. That's a compulsion. Like I'm compelled, I'm expressed in that way by this larger event. So it's just, again, if we look at the world of forms, I can't find any two forms that are identical anywhere in any apparent realm. And so it is with human beings. Like I wouldn't expect that people who agree that all of this is a totally mysterious happening just happening, I wouldn't expect that they would express that in exactly the same way.
Some people, I mean, while you're out there meeting people in the public, there are some people, who might be coming from the same place as you're coming, who can't even stomach talking to people who have questions. Again,
exactly.
maybe it goes back to I'm enlightened, you're not, but they can't stand to be with people who don't have that perspective. Do you have any thoughts about the kind of difference in human behavior?
Well, again, existence just expresses this incredible range of apparent forms, and no two of them are identical. Now, many may be very similar, but they're never exactly identical. And it is the case that some people each one of us is expressed in a certain way so that we will only function in a certain way. And I know within spiritual circles, there's the focus tends to go on apparent individuals that almost fit a kind of idealized notion of what a human being should be. And then people start saying, well, that person is enlightened, but this other person over here who seems to be saying the same thing, but really isn't a very attractive person. They don't like to socialize. They don't really express themselves very clearly. They can't possibly be enlightened. And I don't feel that's true. You can take a very large grouping of people that all agree that this is a totally mysterious happening, just happening, and that there isn't any so-called human being that exists apart from this happening. And each one of those apparent people that share this notion of this great mysterious event, each one is unique in the way they're expressed, because they have nothing to do with their expression. They are one of the apparent unique expressions of existence. And so you can have people that are real grouches, anti-social. You look at somebody like U.G. Krishnamurti, and he would say some pretty cutting stuff, and he would get fed up with being around people coming, asking questions. He would just, at a certain point, just say, "Get out of here! Like, I don't go anywhere to ask questions. Like, why do you come here and bother me with these questions?" And he would say, "Just go home and live your life. Like, I can't help you. Just go home and live your life." And he's basically, in that one statement, he's basically saying, go home and be what you have to be, because you don't make a mistake in any portion of it. Like, everything we apparently do is the movement of this larger event. So, even if you're spending your life looking for money and power and all the rest of it, you're still a legitimate expression of this greater dance of existence. It's just not what you would call a spiritual expression. But the whole notion of a spiritual expression is ridiculous too. It's all a totally mysterious dance. Again, this is just for people's consideration. I'm just presenting this. It's not that anybody has to look at it this way. But from my sensibility, like there's nothing wrong with it. As the old Taoists used to say, there's nothing wrong. Everything is right. Basically saying everything is the correct expression of nature. And I'll ask people, like, which squirrel is doing it wrong? Which snowflake is doing it wrong? These are ridiculous notions. We wouldn't go into a forest somewhere and start criticizing all the expressions of nature. We wouldn't be saying, if that beetle had just worked a little harder, he could have been a butterfly. And we wouldn't look at a shrub and say, if you'd tried a little harder, if you'd just found the right spiritual practice, you could have been a Douglas fir or a huge cedar of some kind. It just wouldn't make any sense. All of it is the natural and legitimate expression of existence.
Yeah, you can get up there and say everything's moving according, whatever the words you use, everything's moving according to its natural way. Or, I don't know if those were your words or not. But if someone else says it, it might not sound like they really know what they're saying. It might be imitating your words. I don't know if I want to go in that direction unless you have something to say about it.
It's true, but what's wrong with somebody, there are lots of people just mouthing the words of someone else. And in fact, from my perspective, just look at the general use of the word awareness within the non-dual community. I mean, why is that word so important? I get lots of people coming to me that say, for 30 years I've been listening to non-dual teachings, and they all say that we're basically awareness. And I'll say, awareness is a meaningless sound. There's just this happening of the moment. Don't call it anything. You don't have to call it anything. And even if you do call it something, it's just a meaningless sound that's used to point to the event. So the sounds can fall away, the labels can fall away, and the event still makes itself obvious. It doesn't even require a movement of the intellect. It's just a movement of the so-called intellect. Even if there isn't any thought present, there's still some basic feeling that something's happening. So, there is this. People will have a sense of this, and they'll pick up words that they've heard from somebody else's talks, or they'll pick up words from certain books, and they'll use those words, and that's fine. I mean, that's also a legitimate expression of existence.
People, in the beginning, you said people attribute you as being the guy who says everything's perfect. So you probably never used those words, or maybe in some context you did.
Yes, early on.
In a sense, you are. You're not saying it because you're not saying anything's wrong.
No, so, I'm not saying. Really, I mean, the Taoists had that phrase of nothing is wrong, everything's right, and I mean, the whole notion of right and wrong just doesn't even apply to this. The Buddha had a nice phrase. He said, "Descriptions don't apply."
Does the word obvious?
What
word that you use, or?
Yes, I would say that I'm pointing to the obvious, but it seems to be very difficult for most apparent people to acknowledge the obvious. And it all seems to be self-evident, but that's just from this apparent expression, or this apparent sensibility that we might share. From this apparent perspective, that's self-evident, but we're not the one and only expression of existence. There are other apparent expressions of existence, and from those apparent sensibilities, this isn't so self-evident. And actually, from my perspective, it doesn't really matter. Like this is only important to me because I'm compelled to have this this sensibility, and it seems to be important to a number of other apparent people because they're compelled to have this sensibility. I can't even teach somebody to have this sensibility. They either relate to what's being expressed or they don't. If they don't, there's no way to make them relate to this expression.
I made a mental note a little earlier about yoga, and the woman you mentioned, was it Sandra?
Yes, Sandra Stewart.
And she has a yoga center. I'm assuming she's a yoga teacher?
Yes.
Has her teaching of yoga changed since she came to this, since her perspective changed?
Yes, she feels that she offers yoga more as an exploration now than she did in the past. I mean, I can't really speak for her in any great detail, but I know just generally that would be the case. In the past, she had a feeling that her yoga practice was meant to impose something on her being, to correct certain things, and now she has more of the sense of this is an exploration, and each and every apparent human being gets to explore their specific and unique expression. So she presents this more as an exploration and an acknowledgement of the moment, and in the case of Hatha Yoga, it's an acknowledgement of the physical sensations of the moment, and then along with that, you're also acknowledging the movement of thoughts and emotions and all of that, and so ultimately, from her approach, she's really inviting people to this larger, mysterious dance of the moment.
Do you go to? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
Do you go to any of her classes then, yoga classes? Sounds like you do.
Well, I did in the early days because I wanted to learn more about, she teaches Iyengar yoga, and I was impressed with Iyengar yoga because of their careful alignment of the body in any of the postures, and I had severe back problems throughout most of my life. I crushed the last disc in my back in a work accident, and that had to be operated on. So I was looking for various ways of keeping my back strong, and so in the early days with her, I wanted to learn a lot of what she was teaching. And I no longer go to any group classes of yoga, but I use yoga in my daily activities. I start the day with some yoga postures just to keep my back toned, and I couple it with some other things that I've learned over the years. So,
has she, extended her classes to teach perhaps a more meditative yoga or a more, broader yoga?
No, she's very much. She enjoys very much this Iyengar style, and she realizes that for the people that come to her, they're not usually looking for that broader philosophical aspect. They're looking very specifically for this, some training in how to move their bodies and strengthen their bodies. But where she can, she makes the invitation to acknowledge the happening of the moment. So things like the corpse pose. Traditionally in Hatha Yoga, that would be the hardest pose for anyone to actually do, because in the corpse pose, you're not doing anything. And it's very difficult for human beings to not attempt to do something. And so in the corpse pose, she's really making an invitation for people to just open up to the actual event of the moment without trying to manipulate it in any way. So that would be one of the aspects of her approach.
So you say a number of people get what you're saying, they come to, the perspective switches. Do any of them begin their own groups, their own talks, and do you encourage that at all?
If somebody's really drawn to that, compelled to express it, by all means, I support that. I encourage them to express it in their own terms, and to really, to take it slowly, to approach it in whatever way they feel is appropriate to approach the expression of this. And there seem to be a number of people in a number of different areas, California, the west coast of Canada, Australia, England. They, in what I've been expressing, they have, they somehow have grown in a kind of confidence to express their own sense of it. And I encourage that. I mean, not to start groups per se, but I recognize that in certain apparent individuals that this is a very natural part of their expression, that they feel compelled to begin to express this to other people. But I'm also I always caution them and say, really find the places where it's appropriate to express this. This really isn't what the average person on the street wants to hear. And I've discovered that even most of the people who come to non-dual gatherings don't really want to hear what I'm offering.
Yeah.
I find it much easier to relate to a group that has no knowledge about non-duality, and so it's just a consideration of what their actual experience of life is, and in that they can just take it or leave it. And I find that pretty much with whatever groups I'm presenting this to, pretty much all of them can understand what I'm saying. And let's say maybe 50% of them find it very interesting. 50% they find it curious, but they don't. Essentially, they're not really all that interested in it. 50% are interested in it, but when they leave the gathering, their focus will go on other things. But there's a much smaller percentage. When they hear this, something fundamentally shifts, and they don't go back to looking at life the way they did before hearing this perspective. Their personal story no longer makes as much sense to them. They understand that they have a personal story, but they realize that this really isn't describing what's actually going on here. And there's a growing sense that all of this is simply happening on its own, that it's just this larger mysterious dance moving and shifting in whatever way it moves and shifts. And for many of them, there's just a real feeling of rest, that there isn't anything essentially wrong with their expression, and in any particular moment, the event of existence is going to push forward whatever it is they're going to be interested in or what they're going to need to do, and it will also push forward whatever abilities or lack of abilities they will have.
So you meet like once a month. That's not. What do you do in between? I mean, you work a job or?
Yeah, I work in a warehouse, 40 hours a week. I have my parents are now in their 80s. They live in a nearby city, so I go out there. In the last little while, I've been going out there quite often because they've been shifting from their house of 54 years to a small condominium. So I was wanting to go out there and just kind of support them in that move, because that's a big move for somebody in their 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a circle of friends here in Winnipeg. We kind of get together, eat a meal once in a while together, and watch a movie. I like going for walks, both in summer and in winter. To me, it doesn't really matter how cold it is. I just really bundle up, and I just enjoy getting out for a walk. So it's all pretty ordinary.
Well, you're lucky. You don't have a computer. You don't really have much. You don't deal with the whole email, Facebook, the whole.
No. Facebook, I'm not involved with. Marcus has put a site on Facebook for me just to kind of notify people of certain things, but I don't participate in that. And as I said, I only have access to the internet when I go to work, and I use one of the company computers just before the workday starts. So there are a few emails that I might have to respond to there. People send in questions from around the world during the month, and I pick those questions off the internet on my email site, and then once a month, at the end of the month, I respond to whatever questions have been sent in, and then I do an audio recording of that response here in my little apartment, and I put that on a flash drive, and I take that to work, and then I send that to Marcus in England, and Marcus downloads it and puts it on the website. So at the end of each month, there's a response to various questions that have been sent in. But it's all very manageable. I don't find that I'm drawn. I don't spend a lot of time in communities that put the focus on non-duality, because I find my own particular interests they just don't lie there. So, I'm compelled to express this perspective, but I don't particularly consider it a non-dual perspective. It's just, it just seems like in the course of a lifetime, this is the perspective that made most sense.
Yeah, it's really nice. I mean, I don't know. I wonder if some of it's a Canadian thing too. I wonder.
Well, it's interesting you
I
should
don't
say
know.
that. Yeah, it's interesting you should say that because I lived in California for about 10 years, and there was, I was in contact with a lot of different spiritual groups, just like I was living in a meditation center, a Vipassana meditation center, run by Ruth Dennison, and all kinds of people would come through, and the focus was always on this spiritual quest, and when I came back here to Winnipeg, there isn't much of that happening here. So the people who show up, they just come out of a curiosity, and there's a kind of practical quality to the people here, like a Midwest practicality. It's almost like either something makes sense or it doesn't make sense, either something works or it doesn't work, and it's just left at that. It's not kind of housed, it's not couched in 30 years of spiritual training or or people strongly belonging to a particular spiritual group.
Yeah, there's no fascination associated with it.
No.
It's not the whole spiritual fascination, spiritual experience scene.
Exactly, because this perspective just houses whatever your unique expression is. So maybe your unique expression is to go off to California and spend time with a lot of people talking about non-duality and spiritual lifestyle, but that's for a very small percentage of the human population. I mean, other people want to go home and raise a family. Somebody else wants to become the boss of a company. And this perspective fits within all of those realms too. I mean, one of the people that relate to this the strongest, in the gatherings that I have, that have been happening recently, is a woman who's a real estate agent. And she's very successful as a real estate agent, and she doesn't want to stop being a real estate agent. But she relates to this non-dual perspective, what we might generally call this non-dual perspective, in an incredibly strong way. So, this is why I don't want to start any particular group. Like, somebody might ask me, well, they would say to me, well, what would you do in this particular situation? And I don't even want to say what I would do. I might say, well, here's some things you might consider exploring, but I'm not going to say, here's what I would do and you should do that too, because I'm one particular expression of existence. My approach to life, my unique my unique approach to life isn't really going to fit somebody else's unique approach to life. I might have a personality which kind of sits back and observes things for a while before it actually wants to jump in and participate in something, and somebody else has a personality that wants to just jump right in and kind of learn in their activity. And so I'm not going to say to somebody, oh, you should be more observant, or you should step back more and wait. I'm just supporting people in whatever their expression is. If they have a certain natural way of engaging life, then that's a totally legitimate expression of existence. And, if they come to what I'm saying and they say, wow, everything you say really backs up this, what I've been taught in Catholicism, I'll just ask them, like, well, do you relate more to those Catholic expressions? And if they say yes, I'll just say, well, then go for it. I mean, if this is your sense of those Catholic expressions and you feel that those Catholic expressions really express this most clearly for you, then go with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it all sounds pretty simple.
Yes, I mean, from my sense of it, life is a very simple happening. It's just this happening the way it happens. And there really isn't anything that can be said about it. uh, thoughts and words, apparent thoughts and apparent words will happen, will be part of the happening. There's no way anybody can stop that. But for each and every one of us, we use those words in a unique way. We may use them in a way that's similar to somebody else, but certain words have certain meanings to us, and one word that might be very appropriate for someone to point to something in existence, that word will just somehow aggravate someone else. And so it's important that they just relate to the words that make the most sense to them, the words that have meaning to them, the words that express all of this as clearly as it can possibly express for them. And it's the same. Some people are drawn to spend a lifetime in therapy, in psychological therapies, and someone else wants nothing to do with therapy groups. And it's not that one is right and the other is wrong. It's just that one expression is legitimate, is a legitimate expression of nature, and this other expression is a legitimate expression of nature.
Everything's changing, so how does your sharing or your confession of what you're compelled to speak about, how does that change over the years, months, days, or even during the course of a meeting? Who knows?
Right. It seems to be getting simpler. I have less and less interest of having this focus on the world of thought and the storylines. Early on with the books, I expressed this as, it was expressed as clearly as possible within the storylines, but now there's much more of an interest just in the event. And also, recently, it's kind of interesting, there's, it's just a sense of there's only this happening of the moment and the way it's expressing itself. And so the focus seems to be going on the way that it's expressing itself, that everything is being expressed in its way, that all of our doing is its expression. All of our apparent doing, all of our apparent being is simply the way that this larger event of existence is expressing itself. And so this sense that there is only the way, a very Taoist kind of term there. Just in the last week or so, I expressed this in the last response on the website, that there is only the way that life's expressing itself. There's nothing we can say about it, and we aren't doing ourselves. We're just a portion of this larger dance, and there's just the way it's expressing itself. And so in that, there's just this very deep sense of rest, that it will simply play out the way it plays out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know that, I often get comments from people that saying that I'm trying to sweep aside the world of thought, but I'm not. I'm simply pointing out that the world of thought isn't our doing, and the apparent movement of thought and the apparent expression of words, these are not our doing. These are a compelled movement of nature. So I'm not sweeping them aside because I'm just simply saying we're not doing them in the first place. They will happen the way they happen because they're part of this compulsive dance of existence.
What else do people give you a hard time about? Not that you. I'm not trying to say that you feel you're giving a hard time. I'm just using those words.
Right. They have some difficulty considering that they may not be influencing the movement of existence in any way whatsoever. They often feel that I'm saying there is no free will, but I'm not specifically saying that. I'm saying that terms like will, like free will and determinism, destiny, fate, these terms don't apply to what's actually happening here. What's happening here is a dynamic that, descriptions don't apply to this dynamic. And that I'm just pointing out that there can be moments where these apparent words and thoughts fall away, and the dynamic is still makes itself obvious. And the apparent words and the apparent thoughts will come back as a portion of, it's an expression of this dynamic, this liveliness, the lively occurrence of this moment, this happening, this dynamic, this dance, this function. Just this. And again, this is like what I say is just for people's consideration. I'm not interested in making somebody have a non-dual expression or a sensibility. I'm just putting forth this perspective, and either someone relates to it or they don't relate to it.
Yeah. My sense is that there's people that in their own way, for one thing, they understand this point of view, live from it, but they can also communicate it. And my sense is that in any community, even small ones, very small ones, there are people there who can share that perspective. I imagine there's some of it being done that we don't know about, none of us know about, and there probably could be a lot more of it being done.
Yes, way more than we can acknowledge. It's just any number of the people that come to these gatherings and have come over the years, like, it's quite obvious. It's very clear to them, and they live from this sensibility. But they will say that they couldn't really express it even if they tried, and many of them have tried. And however, they do live from this sensibility, this great, that there is only this great mysterious dance. And just as you say, there will be others living, in certain parts of the world where, they're expressing this probably quite clearly in some way, but they're not drawn to, or it just doesn't manifest in a larger venue. And, I'm quite surprised that this whole thing has kind of manifested the way it has in what I'm expressing. Fundamentally, I just started expressing this to people here in Winnipeg, and I was compelled to write the books. And basically, when that writing was taking place, I just thought it would just be for the people that came to the gatherings here in Winnipeg. And then somebody happened to send the books to Joan Tollefson, and she very generously put a huge amount of support behind publicizing the books. And then she connected with Julian Noyce and just told him that he should have a look at them. And then Julian offered to publish them. And so it's all just been kind of a grassroots thing. Yeah. And now I'm getting invitations to go to a lot of different places, but I don't have a huge urge to travel. I was in England last year and for a 2-week period, and I went to California this year for a 2-week period, or this past year. So let's see, in 2011 I was in England, 2012 I was in California, and now this year in August I'll probably be going back to England again for a 2-week period. But I don't really have any urge to travel more than that, although I get invitations to do a lot more traveling. But in my own sense, like, I very much enjoy the life that I have. It's a quiet life, and I have a nice circle of friends, and just the simple routine that I have, I really enjoy, and I very much appreciate that. There's this opportunity to offer this perspective in a larger way through the website. I mean, again, even the website, Marcus Fellows read my books, and he got in touch with me and said, if you want, I mean, we could put together a website. He's a web designer and a very good one, and he said we could put together a website. He says I'll do whatever you want to do, and so we've had great fun just keeping it very simple, and I wanted a certain consistency of message there, and a certain clarity, and so a number of people have commented on that's what comes across.
So in our little conversation, what else should I be asking you?
Nothing really. I think. I mean, unless you have something arising, I don't really have anything else arising.
Well, like I said, I don't prepare these. I don't. I just rather speak to the person and see what comes up. Try to I don't know. I mean, these are kind of like non-interviews in a way,
Yes, yeah, I think that's great. It's, I mean, the interviews often fall within the parameters of the existing non-dual community, and it's an adventure to set all of that aside and just go in without any preconceived notion of where it's going or what it should be about, and just see what manifests.
So you do come across as a very, I use the word unfettered, very, very clean teacher, clean teachings. But what do you hate that people would be surprised about?
Beats.
What?
Beets. I can't stand beets.
Beets. Oh, food. Beets.
Yes. Yeah. It's
all right.
No, there's really there isn't anything that really stands out that you mean what can't I stand about what spiritual teachings or?
No, not that. I don't know what I'm saying. I just when a person comes across it as a certain way, sometimes you want to know, like, if I'm, asking about Ramana Maharshi, someone who knows him, I want to know, like what drives him crazy.
Oh.
Beats, I can understand that,
I still have occasionally. There's still a frustration with certain behavior. When I'm basically what you would call an introvert. I mean, I enjoy people, but I don't enjoy a lot of time in large crowds. And the job I have, I'm in contact with the public a lot, and sometimes there can just be situations where there's a real frustration, and but that just seems very naturally part of how I'm expressed, and I can get pretty cutting sometimes in certain situations, but then it becomes very obvious that that's what's happening, and it is a kind of natural tempering of that, even though the frustration will continue to play out. It's like a storm. I just see these things like I find that the whole sense of the movement of nature to be a very natural way to relate to all of this. So things like emotional outbursts, I mean, these are like storms in nature, and nature doesn't generally express itself as being incredibly disturbed all the time, but there are these outbursts of weather in nature, and then within our own apparent being, there are these outbursts, and I mean, I have no interest. There was a time when I thought spirituality had something to do with, or this exploration would have something to do with reaching some point of perfection, but that left a long time ago. It's more just an acknowledgement of what your natural expression is, and in acknowledging that, there's you there's just a simple saying that, yeah, there's a frustration with certain situations, and that's a very natural aspect of my life. And, it may change, but it'll only change if nature is going to move in some way where that, it's always moving and shifting and dancing in some way, but often your life looks like variations on certain themes. And even though it's never exactly the same from moment to moment, there's kind of a general similarity there, and if it changes radically, it'll have, that'll happen if nature moves in that way. But even the urge to be interested in something, I don't create. It's just each of us has an urge to be interested in certain things, and what's of great interest to me might not be of any interest to someone else. What else?
I don't know, I don't know. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was always fascinated. I was fascinated by teachers like Alan Watts, who, to me, like, he just, from the age of 14, he had this incredible clarity, and yet, he certainly wasn't presenting as some idealized standard of human behavior. He drank quite a bit and was a bit of a womanizer, and yet he was very clear that all of this is a totally mysterious event. And, there are those who say, as you pointed out earlier on, there are those who say that, it's only the ones that are beyond all of their defilements that are enlightened, but the so-called realization is the realization that no one is doing any of this. So, and it is the fact that all kinds of people can have a very strong sense that all of this is a totally mysterious event, simply eventing on its own, and yet each and every one of those so-called individuals will be expressed in a very different way, and some of them aren't necessarily all that pleasant. And that's just a fact. It's just a part of the expression. So often spiritual groups are thinking that if everybody could see life in this way, we could move all of humankind to some state of perfection. But my sense of this is that in acknowledging how life is actually expressing itself, you come to realize that all of it is the perfect expression of this great mysterious dance. And it's perfect because it is simply the expression of this great mysterious dance, and it's the natural expression of this great mysterious dance. So in a way we could say it's already perfect. But then that doesn't get rid of what we might call the pains of life. Even those pains are part of the perfection.
Yeah. Well, I think you've definitely, communicated I don't know, kind of the unknown, I think. Kind of that mystery you're talking about. Somehow it gets communicated. Yes,
and that, at the end, the considerations that I present, when they're considered, they don't really leave us with a focus on explanation or a focus on control. It's a simple acknowledgement of that whatever this is, nothing can really be said about it, and it's simply happening on its own.
And yet, you've used the word consider a number of times. How does a person consider?
Well, again, from in the way that I'm expressed, it's simply that we start to consider what our storyline already is. So the interesting.
How do you do that? How does one consider a storyline?
Well, we might consider that at some point, those of us that have lived life for any, apparent number of years, we will start saying that everything is changing. And pretty much everyone I know has said either to themselves or to their friends that everything is changing. Everything in life is changing. The scientists tell us that everything is changing. So within the existing storylines that we have, the basic storyline is saying that there is only a great flowing event. Now, traditionally there are a number of ways of pointing to that. So you could call it the Great Spirit, because that's a great phrase to describe a happening that has no particular form. It's moving and shifting and dancing. Or you could call it the River of Life, or you could call it the Unformed Ocean of Existence, or you could just call it the Unformed, which is what the Buddha did. He just referred to it as the Unformed. And so right away, and just a consideration of what our actual experience of life is, what we say all the time, immediately we're acknowledging the Great Spirit or the unformed ocean of existence, because we all walk around saying everything is changing. The truly interesting thing about it is that we walk around saying that, but at the same time we believe wholeheartedly in these stories about form. Mm-hmm. So, we can consider just the juxtaposition of those two notions, that, on one hand we say everything is changing, and then on the other hand, if we believe that there are forms. So it's just a consideration of the storylines that we have, and do they actually match our experience, and do they actually make any sense? Which one makes more sense? Is it that everything is changing, or that there is actual form? Because, if we point to any particular form, we somehow have the sense that that form is changing, even if it seems very solid and stable, like a mountain. We also have within our general storylines, we have storylines about old mountain ranges, and if we look at old mountain ranges, they end up being small hills instead of the Alps. So we have this general sense that everything is without any particular form, but we don't acknowledge it. And then, if we consider our storyline about our own history, our own life story, I can ask you, do you have the impression that you created your body and your brain? Right now, do you have the impression that you're overseeing how all the synaptic firing of the cells of your brain are occurring? Do you have the sense that you're making your heart beat? Or do you have the impression that you created your basic needs? Did you decide in the womb that you'd spend a good portion of your life going to the toilet? And it's quite obvious that we didn't. And if I asked you, did you decide what things you're going to be interested in life? Maybe you have for instance, the interest in this non-dual sensibility. Did you decide somewhere way back that this was the way your life was going to go, or did it just arise in this way? Somebody else is interested in early Peruvian languages, or someone else is interested in surfing, and they're traveling the world trying to find a good wave to surf. But you're not doing that. And I'm just pointing out that, the fundamental urges to investigate something or move in an apparent direction, we don't create those. So it's all simply a consideration of what our stories in life are, and the sense of life that we commonly have. And so our abilities, if you have an ability to run very fast and an urge to maybe refine that and enter the Olympics, you didn't create the essential ability in the first place, and you didn't even create the urge to refine it or the capacity to refine it. If you have an urge to play the piano, you'll discover whether you have the capacity of a Mozart or the capacity of a Barry Manilow, but you won't decide that you're going to have the capacity of a Mozart or the capacity of a Barry Manilow. It will simply make itself obvious what your capacity is. And the urge to refine whatever capacity you have, you don't create that. That also simply arises. You either have that urge or you don't have that urge. I know lots of people that are tremendously talented, very naturally, with music, but they never had an urge to spend a lifetime refining that. And I know other people who really don't fundamentally have that much talent, but they spent an entire lifetime attempting to refine whatever ability they had. And they didn't just decide to do that. They were compelled to do that.
Yeah, the word surrender is coming up. You haven't used that word at all, and I don't know if you would use that word. I think you're more pointing to the surrender that's already is.
Exactly. There's nothing to surrender to because, see, the interesting thing about wanting to surrender to life is, again, trying to have control over it. If I just surrender to it, everything will be somehow better. But this isn't a matter of surrender. It's a matter of acknowledging a fact. So, I can say there's a White House down at the end of the street. You can walk down to the end of the street and have a look to see if there's a White House there. You don't have to surrender to the fact that there's a White House there. Either there's a White House there or there isn't. And so, to me, this is simply the acknowledgement of some basic facts. And the interesting thing is, one of the really interesting things is the facts lie within a storyline that actually isn't the truth. And so in acknowledging the facts that we have in our storyline, they dismantle the storyline. And the storyline itself, the fantasy itself, ends up saying, I can't possibly be the truth. And there's no other way of expressing what's going on here. We don't have any other tool for saying anything about what's going on here. It's just this, whatever this is. And the same thing within the storyline. If we examine the storyline that we all commonly carry, we don't have no one has an experience of actually directing their lives. So if someone is really interested, and again, they can't create the interest, they're either interested or they're not. If they have an interest in considering these storylines and considering what they're actually pointing to, we come to realize that within our storylines, it's the storylines themselves are saying that we haven't created ourselves and that we haven't created the urges that we have to go in any particular direction. And this is our common impression of existence, but very few people will acknowledge that. And again, I have absolutely no idea what any of this actually is. It's just happening the way it happens.
So the storyline kind of dissolves itself. Sounds
That's
like.
right. It takes away its own validity. And the apparent storyline still presents itself, but the storyline itself then becomes a totally mysterious event. Or it's acknowledged as a totally mysterious event, simply happening the way it's happening. In the same way, this apparent conversation is occurring. So we can say it's Daryl speaking with Jerry, but that's not actually what's happening here, and we don't have any way of saying what's happening here. But it's apparently happening, and somehow, even if we acknowledge that it's a totally mysterious event, the event goes on presenting itself. Or not. It may be that without a strong acknowledgement, the whole conversation comes to an end. But it will happen in whatever way it happens, and we don't. For instance, like you approach this with the sense of not really having a particular direction for it or particular question to ask, but certain questions have arisen, and I apparently come to this with not really knowing what you're going to ask, and certain responses arise. And all of that is just the compulsive dance of whatever this greater event is. It just presents itself in this way.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
this perspective, this sensibility isn't denying the day-to-day aspects of our lives. It's simply pointing out that those day-to-day aspects are the compulsive dance of something that can't be explained in any way whatsoever. And that, even if we come to realize that this is a totally mysterious dynamic, simply happening the way it happens, that's not going to wipe out the sense of a day-to-day existence and certain apparent words rising up in a certain apparent situation, or certain apparent behavior arising in a certain apparent situation. It's just pointing out that all of that is fundamentally a totally mysterious event, and that there is only this event, this dynamic, this function that's occurring. And there's no way of saying what it is or what's making it happen the way it happens. And everything we apparently are is simply the expression of this totally mysterious event.
Yeah, I can see why you're, becoming popular in the world. I mean, you're obviously a gifted expresser of this stuff. And not only that, but you're very, you're patient, you expand on things, clear, you're open, and you've been very generous with your time, Darryl. So, yeah, so thank you very much. I think a lot of questions could arise out of what you said, and I don't know. I don't consider myself a good interviewer from the point of view of finding crystal clear, relevant questions. I think I'm better from the point of view of just saying nothing and letting a person talk. But
Right.
which you did.
Right. And I'm very appreciative of your asking for this interview and giving me the opportunity, yet again another opportunity to present this perspective. And I'm always pointing out that it's just for people's consideration. And I've seen your name here and there in relation to non-duality, and so when you wrote through and asked if I'd be interested in being interviewed, I was kind of curious about meeting you, and yeah, so
that's great.
So you've had, obviously you've had what seems to be a lifetime interest in this kind of thing, yes?
Yeah, I mean, even since I was a kid, I think I had experiences where I was just amazed that I was aware. Just
yes.
I'm aware. That's it. So.
Yes.
But I never had a formal study. I never had a formal teacher. Never. Just pursued my own inner experiences, being aware of the sense of I am, following it, and just letting things happen. And just letting things happen, I think, is a lot.
Yes.
Of what I do or what I've done, and then at one point I had a calling to. I knew I wanted to talk about non-duality in my own way, and so I found the internet was the way to do that, and that's what I've been doing since about '98. That's just what I've been doing. It just unfolds as it unfolds, and
right.
I love everybody who's in it. The people, whether it's yourself or the people who have an attitude, like some people
right.
write me. Some people will write me and say, "Look, like I'm forwarding mail to them because I'm advertising their book, and they're saying, just don't send me their stuff. I can't deal with these people. It's like, no one gets it anyway. That attitude. I don't want to mention names, but
right.
And like you say, I mean, it's all everyone's great. I mean, you have to feel that way about people.
Yeah, it's quite an amazing thing. Like all these different expressions, and each one unique. And even if you don't like it, it ends up being more like some exotic expression. Like if you went to some South American jungle, I'm sure there's lots of expressions there you wouldn't like, but it's still quite fascinating. And there'd be a lot of expressions in that jungle that you wouldn't want to associate with at all. It's the same. I find it's the same thing with humankind, but
it is, yeah. You don't have to like it. You don't have to like much of it, but you have to love it, sort of.
Exactly. Yeah, it's fascinating, and the fact of the matter is, whatever somebody's doing, it has some intrinsic meaning to them, even if it doesn't have any meaning to me. It's got some intrinsic meaning to them, And
And
I mean, I
it serves someone too. So
yeah, yeah, exactly. So it's yeah, it's I mean, even within these supposed stories of awakening, it's like it's different for each person. Like you were saying, you didn't have any formal study, and you just had this urge to follow, to just let things happen, and the sense of I am, or the basic sense of
yeah,
awareness, and in my case, it was this um, urge to just acknowledge the moment as clearly as I possibly could, and along the way, I'd heard about Vipassana meditation, and actually it was Jiddu Krishnamurti, the first one, that he just said, if you want to learn about life, then watch it flow. So that fit my sensibility very well, because it was just a simple acknowledgement of the moment happening, and yeah, and then at some point, apparently much later, it just became obvious the whole thing was just this mysterious dance, and I didn't exist as anything apart from it. And so, like, for each apparent person, who comes to this apparent realization, it's different. Um, so again, it's there can be these kind of mix-ups where people start talking about their own particular journey more than they talk about the acknowledgement of um, the totally mysterious event. And there are certain ways that we can all acknowledge this moment as a totally mysterious dance, and at the same time acknowledge that each one of us is going to have a unique expression. So sometimes with teachers, they kind of confuse their own unique expression with the larger fact that they're pointing to, and it comes across as though everyone else is supposed to be like that teacher, but it's just not the case.
yeah,
And I love teachers like Alan Watts and U.G. Krishnamurti. I mean, these were individuals that, for most spiritual people, apparent spiritual people, seekers, they had a very difficult time with individuals like Chogyam Trungpa and U.G. Krishnamurti and Alan Watts, because they obviously seemed to be just ordinary human beings. U.G. didn't even seem to be all that pleasant a personality, and Alan Watts certainly seemed to have, for most people, they would think he would have a real problem with alcohol and with sex, and same thing with Chogyam Trungpa. But the fact of the matter was, they were very clear that this is a totally mysterious dance. Whatever this moment is, there's no way of saying what it is, and no one is making it happen. It's just happening the way it happens. And it just happened that their unique expression just didn't fit what a lot of people think is an enlightened being.
yeah, and yet they live on. I mean, those people.
Yes.
Their works, such as they exist, whether it's in videos or whatever, they'll go on and on.
Yes.
I'm also interested in your ability to communicate, which is highly developed, I feel. Before you came to this perspective, were you always a good communicator, a good speaker?
Yes, basically I had an urge to do public speaking when I was in high school, and so I would get involved with various causes, whether it would be raising money to get food to certain people, or getting involved with things like UNICEF and making appeals. And I was always, there seemed to be a fascination with words and their power. And again, as I mentioned earlier, there was always an interest in the rhythms of words and the texture of words, and the beauty of that. And I was really attracted to the simplicity of expression, or considering how simply one can present something. So at a certain point, like in art school, I had an interest in graphic design, so that's a combination of words and images. And at that point, I I really became focused on using words that were very simple. I began to realize that I would rather say cat than feline, and that actually the things I was saying would be clearer if I was using words like cat instead of feline, and easier for the general public, English-speaking public anyway, to relate to. And then I don't know. I mean, even things like the English that's spoken here in Winnipeg is considered to be the easiest English in the world to understand. So that at one point, the major telephone companies were wanting to put all of their long-distance operators here in Winnipeg, and they wanted it to be Manitobans that kind of staffed those positions, because the English that's spoken here is apparently I don't know if this is true. I've been told this. There was this rumor of all of these telephone companies wanting to have their long-distance operators from Manitoba and established here in Manitoba because the English is so easy to understand. So I mean, I'm sure that has that's some aspect of it as well.
Yeah, and call centers, I guess, probably all want to be located.
Could be.
Maybe in Manitoba. I know it's true in Nova Scotia because there's not much of an accent.
Right. Now that's something that annoys me. The calls that come from call centers.
Call centers, yeah.
Yeah, it's just this intrusion into your home with these calls.
We don't. That's something we haven't done in non-duality yet. Is call people, do cold calling. Hello, this is Darrell Bailey. How would you do a cold call if you were,
I wouldn't even attempt it.
If you wanted people to come to your meeting, like how would you set up a cold call to someone?
See, I wouldn't do that because I'm aware that...
And I have a meeting coming up. How are you tonight? I have a meeting coming up. We're talking about the existence.
Have you ever considered whether you're actually in charge of your life?
Just a second. What are you trying to sell me something? What do you got there?
Absolutely nothing. It's I'm very aware that very few people want to consider this, so I'm very careful about where I open up about this. It's interesting because at work, a lot of the people I work with have read my books, and the two brothers that I work for, they've read my books, and their 84-year-old father, he's passed away now, but when he was 84, he read my books, and he thought they were quite interesting. And but there's one guy at work who he doesn't want to, he has really no interest in this, but every so often, in a busy day, he'll stop and he'll kind of gaze at the ceiling and he'll hold his hand up and he'll say, "I see everything as waves on an ocean." And he's just taking a jab at me. At it. Yeah. We all laugh. I laugh about it because he sees the fact, but he has no particular interest in that. He has more of an interest in hockey, and is very happy that the strike is now over.
Yeah.
But he still sees the basic fact, and we clown around about this stuff. And so, occasionally in a busy day, I'll stop and stare at the ceiling and hold my hand up and say, "I see everything as waves on one great ocean." And then he'll laugh about it. So it's, to me, there's no need to take all of this stuff too seriously. It's only for certain people and not for others.
Yeah, but there must be a lot of people that are just on the edge. All they need is, to see your book or a book like that, or to read a certain line somewhere, and really, do you feel that?
Yes, yeah, that's part of my sensibility, and so I won't turn my back on that. It's there was an essential urge to express this. And to my surprise, there were a lot of people that related to this and really somebody might come to my gatherings maybe for only 2 or 3 sessions, and it's done. Like
Mm.
from that point on, it's just everything is essentially this larger event, and maybe they'll come back once in a while, or maybe I'll never see them again, and or I'll see them in other situations. But I know, they say enough that when I do see them again, that it still remains their essential feeling about life, but they have no interest in sitting around talking about it, and they have other interests. This just becomes something that embraces their particular expression, and maybe they're more interested in art or science or whatever, and their focus goes on that.
Mm.
So to have the opportunity for this perspective to go out to a larger circuit, I mean, that's been quite wonderful, and I really appreciate that people such as yourselves, who you've established yourself as someone who's offering this perspective in many different ways through the voices of many different people, and including your own. And for me to have you offer that, it's wonderful, because maybe there is somebody out there who, just hearing the particular way I express it, it may be the case that the penny kind of drops for them. But my expression isn't for everyone. It's just for, there are certain apparent people that relate to it, and many that don't. And there will be someone else out there expressing it, such as yourself. And maybe the way you express it to someone is all it takes for the penny to drop in that situation. And really, it's not actually cause and effect. It's just, all of this is just part of this larger compelled expression, this dance. So
you don't get up every day or go to a meeting and say, I've got to help someone today. I'm going to go out, I'm going to help someone.
No, but my sensibility, I do have, like, there's a real, what we might call a need in me to participate in society. And there's an urge to be supportive in ways that I consider to be supportive. And in my case, it's very basic things, that the most basic thing that is that everyone be acknowledged as legitimate. Whatever their expression, it's a legitimate expression of existence, and that in their unique expression, they may be expressed in a way that's radically different from the general masses of people, but it's still a legitimate expression, and life has given them certain apparent things that have meaning to them. And so, I encourage that they acknowledge what has meaning to them. It doesn't matter if it doesn't have meaning to anyone else. That, to just, I point out that if something has meaning to you, then that's meaningful to your life. Like it doesn't really matter if somebody else is telling you you should find something else meaningful. It's life is giving you certain things that are meaningful, and so your life will gain a richness if you actually acknowledge that and attend to those things that are meaningful to you. But it could be something vastly different to what I'm interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So so you're calling from your home?
Yeah, I'm in Halifax. Yeah.
You're in Halifax.
Yeah.
I like Halifax. It's a beautiful, beautiful city.
Yeah.
I like the Maritimes. So
yeah.
My brother and I drove out to Prince Edward Island way back. We must have been in our early 20s. And I just remember driving around Prince Edward Island in the countryside and just seeing all of these homes with porches and people sitting on rocking chairs and and it just had this really slow pace of life, and I just thought, man, this is marvelous.
Yeah, yeah, it's exactly how it is there. Yeah, it's nice up there. Yeah, I like
Right.
Nova Scotia. I'm from New Jersey and
All right.
California. So, but no, I've been living in Canada since '87, so I really like it. I really feel fortunate to be out here and
Right.
to be in Nova Scotia. And we started our own groups. We started a group here and to talk about all this stuff, and we have several leaders or facilitators, and everyone has their own way of presenting it.
Right.
So we have a little community here doing that.
I mean, that's one thing that's very nice for me, because for so much of my parent life journey, I didn't really have any particular community that I related to. So, I was in California for 10 years, and I did live at this meditation center, this Vipassana center, run by Ruth Dennison, and I really appreciated all that she offered. And her invitation to explore the moment, I thought, was really something quite special. But I never felt I belonged in any particular community. I was a meditation monk for 6 years, and even though there were certain things, many things that I related to very strongly, there were certain aspects that I just did not feel that I belonged in that particular setting. But since coming back here to Manitoba and relating to the people that came to the gatherings here, I have a very nice circle of friends now that share this perspective. And again, when we get together, the focus isn't on this perspective. The focus is on sharing a meal or talking about what's happening with Stephen Harper and what's happening in other parts of the world, and watching a good movie, listening to some nice music at times.
So so kind of a community has kind of been created around your gatherings.
Yes,
like
yes, but it's not like a group.
Yeah.
The people who come once a month, they aren't generally people that I hang out with. My close circle of friends, it's people that maybe connected with this perspective 12 years ago, when I was initially starting to express this, and some of them became close friends. And
yeah.
But I'm very appreciative of the people who do come, because as you point out, I mean, all the people I'm meeting are really wonderful people. They may lead a very different lifestyle to mine, but I just find them all to be very sensitive and curious individuals. Most of them have a pretty good sense of humor, and so it's I'm really enjoying a sense of community now, way more than I ever did through most of my early years.
Yeah, and you kind of started it too. When you sort of started, I was reading something about introverts and extroverts, and introverts do things that would appear to be extroverted, like public speaking, being involved with groups, but introverts tend to be in control of it. They tend to initiate those things. They don't tend to join someone else's group.
Oh, interesting.
So
that's interesting.
So yeah, you do have a group. I mean, you started the darn thing, and I know in our area, we a couple of us started what we have here. So
right.
So it's nice. Yeah, it's a nice way to be involved in a group.
It is.
Not that you feel you're not like in charge of it or anything like that.
No, not at all.
Just happen to be one of the be there on the ground floor.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what's really great is that the people that I relate to here, I mean, they're very, their own sense of all of this is very clear, and so, sometimes I might say something in a sloppy way, and they'll call me on it, and I think that's great. Or they'll bring up something that's relevant to their own particular situation, which may not be particularly relevant to mine, and so it kind of opens my eyes to someone else's unique expression and what this teaching means, what this perspective means in relation to that very different expression.
Do you sometimes, when you're with your friends, ever get caught up in the identity that you're the guy with the books, with the websites, with the
No.
followers, or you don't get caught up in that for a second or anything like that?
No, it doesn't seem to happen. It's I just see this as a curiosity. I'm very aware that I'm not the one responsible for this. Like I mean, it's just happening the way it happens, and it's a curiosity. But if anything, I sometimes feel like I'm a one-trick pony because I just seem to be expressed with this focus on this particular perspective. And I have friends that have an interest in they're accomplished as musicians and or artists, and they have what seem to be maybe a wider variety of interests. And so I mean, one of the reasons that I enjoy living here is that if I go to California or if I go somewhere else and I'm being acknowledged as the person who wrote these books or the person who makes the talks for the website, I'm kind of elevated in a way within the group, and I don't particularly feel comfortable with that. My own comfort level is more natural when I'm just hanging out with truck drivers and carpenters, and we're talking about driving truck or building something. And I have a friend who's quite a good furniture maker, and at the same time he has a very clear non-dual sensibility himself. And we'll talk about woodworking because I've done a certain amount of that in the past as well. So I very much enjoy the broad range of life's expression and the broad range of human expression, and I wouldn't find it enjoyable to have the focus on me all the time.
Some people talking about books. Some people after they've written a book, it's like they don't want to talk about it, they don't want to deal with it, they don't want to read it. Do you have that sense about your books at all? Although it sounds like you put a lot of work into them, and they sound like works of art for you. But how do you look at them like now?
Now, once in a blue moon, I might go back and have a look at them, and I just kind of it's curious that they arose the way they arose, and I mean I find them to be a clear expression because it's my perspective. So so I kind of I've noticed in the past, like if you look at some of the stuff you've created in your school years, maybe if you've gone to university or something like that and you've written some papers, you may run across one of them years later and you kind of wonder, like, did I actually write this? Because it just seems like very clear in many ways, and it just seems kind of unbelievable that actually that you had anything to do with it. So, and I feel the same thing about these books. Like I find them, once in a blue moon, I might look at them again, and because once in a while there's an urge, there's an urge to maybe write something else. And I go back and I have a look at these books just to see, does it really need to have anything more said? And thus far, it doesn't seem as though anything else needs to be said. So, yeah.
Good. Yeah, that's good. Do you have 2 books out, or how many do you have?
I've got 2 books that Non-Duality Press put out, and then I have a third one that people can order on my website. It's called Buddhessence, and it's more specifically about the core Buddhist teaching. Because when I got out of the monastery, I realized that very few people know what was actually expressed within the Buddhist scriptures. They get a lot of the the newspapers seem to cover a lot of Tibetan Buddhism and a lot of Tibetan Buddhist teachings, but those weren't specifically what the Buddha taught. So there's a lot of emphasis on things like reincarnation, whereas the Buddha actually didn't, hardly ever mention reincarnation. And actually, at one point when he did mention something that was related to reincarnation, all of the monks challenged him on that, and they said, wait a minute, what are you doing? Like, are you deliberately trying to mislead people? And the Buddha said, no, I'm not trying to mislead them with ideas of reincarnation. It's just that some of them are inspired by these kinds of ideas. But the monks fundamentally challenged him on it because that wasn't his teaching. He gave something called a rebirth teaching. It's called Paticca Samuppada, dependent origination. And that's more of a psychological, it's more of an exploration of how, this is a totally mysterious happening, this moment, but it appears to have form. And with that appearance of form, if the focus goes on form, then we're into a whole world of a person who sees a form, and a person who understands a form, and a person who's influencing other forms around him or her. And he was pointing out that all of that's based on ignorance, that it's ignorance that gives rise to formations. Fundamentally, it's just ignorance gives rise to this belief that the form is actually what's true here. So this little book, Buddhessence, kind of points to the core teachings that explore the world of form and how that can't be the reality, and how the attachment to these forms and the belief in those forms, that eventually gives rise to a lot of sorrow.
Would a book like that kind of culminate in the Heart Sutra?
Yes, I would say that. There would be a lot of people who would argue against that, but yes, very much so. And in fact, towards the end of the book, I'm pushing it more in that direction, not specifically with the Heart Sutra, but I'm quoting people like U.G. Krishnamurti or Einstein, who, not so much Einstein. Einstein was more pointing to determinism. He was saying we were all an expression of the laws of the universe, and that none of us direct our own lives. Whereas U.G. was more specifically saying there's absolutely nothing you can say about any of this. It's just moving the way it moves. But towards the end, at the end of Buddhessence, I start to quote some of these people, and Alan Watts too. So just to kind of, it very naturally follows upon what the Buddha basically was recorded as saying back when he lived. And so it very naturally leads to a consideration of the greater mysterious event of existence. Anyway, Jerry, I should probably...
Yeah, no, that was a lot longer than I normally talk.
Right.
Again, I really appreciate it, and you've definitely got the art down of saying what can't be said. So. Yeah,
it's amazing. Like in my process, it was a really big focus. The consideration of certain words and how to express something so radical in a way that isn't going to frighten someone, and would, in fact, offer a possibility of them considering this perspective. So, and all of that was compelled. I mean, I can't really take credit for any of it. So, it's been very nice meeting you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this time, Darrell. Thank you very, very much.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and maybe we'll get a chance to speak in the future again. So. Maybe we'll run across each other somewhere.
We probably will, here or there. Yeah.
Yeah.
All
and
right.
I don't actually. I think I mentioned that I would be back in England again this year, probably in August. If anyone's interested in connecting with me there, so.
So you would have all that would be on your website, your schedule.
Yes, yeah, the
Yeah.
basic schedule will eventually be placed on the website,
Well,
and we're just starting to talk about it now. So I'm pretty sure the whole thing is going to come together.
yeah. Well, I'm sure there's a lot of people listening who are, in the UK, and yeah, they'll probably come see you. Yeah.
All right.
Great.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right.
Anyway,
Daryl,
thanks
thank you
again.
very much.
Okay, take care.
We'll be in touch. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.